About 10% of Egyptians belong to the Coptic faith, making them the Middle East's largest Christian minority. But these Copts have become targets of violence. Since the revolution in Egypt 3 years ago, many churches were destroyed in a rampage last August, and Copts report regular intimidation.
With elections in May and the struggle between the Egyptian military and Islamists continuing, many Copts are worried about the future of their ancient church.
VOA religion correspondent Jerome Socolovsky visited a Coptic church outside Washington, and he talked with Anna Simon's Rebecca Ward about the Copt struggles and their history.
Copts consider themselves the original Christians and the original Egyptians. They say that their church was founded by Mark the Evangelist, one of Jesus' disciples, who went down to Egypt way back when and founded the church.
And they've had a tough time ever since, pretty much.
Theirs is a story of persecution throughout the 20 centuries of their existence.
Paul Giergis is an American-born priest at St. Mark's Coptic Orthodox Church in suburban Washington. Since the beginning, he says, Copts have known suffering.
There was an emperor that said, I'm going to massacre the Christians until the blood in the streets reaches to the knees of my horse.
Copts are enduring what some call their latest pogrom since the Egyptian revolution 3 years ago.
They say that the violence, this latest wave of violence, began when the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. And of course, there was a coup against the Brotherhood about a year ago. And things have gotten better, but not entirely. And they're still concerned about their future. For example, when the security forces in Egypt had a crackdown against a Muslim Brotherhood encampment, in the next 24 hours, scores of churches were attacked, some burned to the ground. And a couple of weeks ago, a young Coptic woman was attacked by a mob and murdered. And they say this happened because she had a cross hanging from the mirror in her car.
What did the Coptic Christians that you spoke to say about what they'd like perhaps the United States to do or the international community to fight back against this violence?
Well, the main thing they want is more pressure on the government in Cairo to protect Copts. They feel that the Obama administration has not spoken out as much as perhaps some leaders in Europe who are now. Prince Charles did talk about Christians in the Middle East. In particular, Pope Francis has brought attention to it. There's lobbying going on. There's an organization called Coptic Solidarity that's active here in Congress, lobbying members. President Obama did mention Christians and Copts in his speech at the National Prayer Breakfast last February, but there are Christian groups in the United States who say he hasn't followed up enough, that he actually spends more time talking about persecution of gays abroad than he does about Christians.
Now, what is the population of Coptic Christians in Egypt compared to the rest of the population?
Well, the actual figure is hard to come by. Historically, the government has played down the number of Copts there. It's believed that at least 10% of the Egyptian population is Coptic. Now, there's been a big exodus since the Arab Spring to places like the US and Europe and Australia.
And they don't have this, or do they have the same rights as Muslim citizens of Egypt?
Right. As citizens, they do have the same rights as Muslims. It's more, as far as I know, organizationally. Copts have always had, certainly in the modern era, have had restrictions placed upon them. They couldn't just build a church anywhere. There was a lot of red tape. There were limits on the height of churches. So it's been a community that's seen itself as second-rate citizens. I think one of the interesting things as far as what it's like to be a Copt in Egypt, I had an interesting conversation with a young Coptic woman out at the church in Fairfax.
Sandy Solomon was out in Cairo with her mother and aunt.
The looks, the language, even the body language. It was very threatening body language with the closeness of people who are interacting with you.
Coptic women are not veiled, and with more and more women, Muslim women in Egypt, being veiled, it's easier and easier to define them, to identify them. And many of them say as a result of that, there's more harassment. And they see it as part of an effort to, explicit or implicit, to degrade their community, to humiliate them as a people.
All right, Jerome Socolovsky, VOA's religion reporter.